So I've been thinking lately about the things that I wish people would have told me as a wildlife photographer when I started out. Things that sometimes took me just a little while to learn, sometimes things that I've been learning up until this day. This is going to be an interesting video in that I usually always speak off of a teleprompter. I kind of script out what I want to say before I speak to a teleprompter. That way I'm really concise, to the point, not wasting your guys' time. But for this video, I wanted to kind of give a just very raw and authentic type of unedited, unfiltered, just talking me with the camera. And so it's going to be different. It might be a little bit more, I don't know if the word might be boring by YouTube sense, but I hope you stick around. I think this is going to be some really valuable information that a lot of this is stuff I've never shared before, but deep down inside I've always struggled with and trying to figure out and understand for, again, like I said, sometimes just the first few years, sometimes up until now. So there should be lots of valuable information here. So sit back, relax, maybe put this on in the background. There's really going to be hardly any visuals to this. Like I said, I'm going to minimize this, barely do any editing to it, really strip it down. And we're just going to talk, have a conversation, you and me. So just so you know, I'm going to group it into 4 categories. So we have technicals. So I'm going to speak about some technicals that I wish I would have known. I'm going to speak about some gear things that I wish I would have known, artistic values that I wish I would have had as a wildlife photographer, and career and community things that I've kind of learned as a wildlife photographer as well. So we're going to start out with the technicals here. So number 1, these are kind of the easiest ones to go through. I wish I would have known that high ISO exposed properly is much better for noise control than low ISO exposed improperly. So what I mean by that is you've probably learned as a photographer that high ISO values generally equal higher noise values, right? But something that I didn't realize and that I learned over time is that if you improperly expose a low ISO image, you'll actually wind up with a noisier image oftentimes than if you just would have gone one whole stop value up in ISO and exposed it properly. So ISO 200, for example, will almost virtually always be cleaner than a shot at ISO 6400 if you expose them both properly. But if you don't expose them both properly, and let's say the ISO 200 shot you expose super dark to where you can barely get any detail out of it, and then let's say maybe you go up a couple stops to ISO 1600, but expose that just really cleanly and maybe even slightly overexpose it. In that scenario, you're going to get a way cleaner, less noisy image out of the ISO 1600 as opposed to ISO 200, even though that's 3 stops higher than ISO 200. So all that to say, I wish I would have known that starting out. Another thing that I wish I would have known is that, man, as a wildlife photographer, one of the hardest things is figuring out why are my shots blurry. As you start out, I think that's one of the things that you kind of struggle with the most is getting a lot of blurry shots, a lot of blur in your shots. So I wish I would have known that most of my shots are blurry due to a low shutter speed or a slightly missed focus. I think that shutter speed wise, right? We have these great cameras with image stabilization now. And granted, they are very good, but still often we don't account for the fact that the subject is often moving, especially as a bird photographer. I noticed that specifically as a bird photographer. It's so rare that a bird's feathers are not blowing in the wind, that they're not moving slightly as they go. So when you find yourself zooming in your editing, you find a lot of details that come out a little bit blurry, stuff like that. So that's one big thing that I did not realize in my early days. And another big thing is I wish I would have known that a lot of my shots are due to slightly missed focus. I think there's a lot of conception as a wildlife photographer that when you see the box around the subject, right, and it tacks focus, that it's going to be perfectly on. But really what you're looking for as a wildlife photographer is a super narrow window in depth of field on the eye. And typically there's a lot of scenarios that I've been in where it just doesn't nail it. For example, I was using the OM1 recently, and there was a lot of shots I did with some goslings. And it was just super up close, super detailed, full frame images, right? Not full frame in the sense of sensor size, but like full in the frame. And there were so many shots in which it was just tacking focus to the chest instead of on the eye, or it was tacking focus to the tail, or things like that, right? So a lot of times, slightly missed focus is causing blurry shots. Now, another big thing is that I wish I would have known megapixels aren't as big of a deal as I thought they were. And actually, glass quality is even more important in my opinion. So megapixels matter. I'm not trying to downplay that. I'm not trying to say that your 48 megapixel camera, right, that you just purchased is worthless. Of course, there is value to high megapixels. I myself shoot with a 50 megapixel, 48 megapixel camera. And so there is value to that. It really does help with the crops, but a lot of times the lack of sharpness in a wildlife photography image is due more to the glass quality of the lens. And I find that with wildlife photography specifically. I think with other types of lenses for other formats and styles of photography, often the glass quality is just higher, versus in wildlife photography, the glass quality really struggles to maintain its sharpness as much because they're building in so much glass and trying to make it affordable to you that oftentimes image sharpness gets sacrificed in that glass. And so I wish that I would have known that. A lot of times I thought, I just need a better megapixel camera. But more times than not, it came down to the lack of image sharpness in the glass rather than the camera. So as a beginner, if you're starting out, you can realize that your 20 megapixel, 24 megapixel camera is probably not the reason why most of your shots are not sharp enough to do crops on. So I wish I would have known that. Another thing, number 4, I wish I would have known that I didn't need a 1000 millimeter reach when I was starting out. I thought that wildlife photography, bird photography was all about getting as close as possible to the subject. When in reality, I've come to learn that a lot of my great shots do not happen at 1000 millimeters. There are still some that do, right? If I were to take my 600 millimeter full frame and then crop into 1000, there still are a lot that are in that range that I like, and that's the ideal version of them. But I wish I would have known that I guess over 50% of my shots don't need that type of crazy reach, which is something that you have a misconception of as a wildlife photographer, I think, when you're starting out. And depending on your style, some people stylistically may only want that type of shot, but I know at least for me, that's not what I want. Now, number 5, the last one of the technical section, learn your histogram. So this is about editing, right? Learn your histogram and what it means. When you look at it, learn how to manipulate it. So when you're in Lightroom or whatever program you use to edit, learn how to manipulate your histogram so that you can achieve just a really nice curve and exposure in your image. In my early days, I really only knew how to do the basics. I started playing around more and more and just playing with buttons, like literally just moving sliders back and forth, moving the tone curves all around, messing with HSLs, right? And all of that stuff to achieve just a better understanding of how my histogram is manipulated. And I promise you that when you understand your histogram, you'll be able to achieve the effect and the style that you're looking for in your images. Whereas if you just understand each thing individually and not how it affects the whole histogram. So let's say, for example, you understand that highlights are going to make your image a little bit less bright on the brightest parts of it. You can understand that by just pulling it down and seeing how that affects your image. But when you really understand how that's going to manipulate your whole histogram curve and how that's going to affect the whole curve, then you can learn how to use all of those things in chemistry with one another to much more quickly achieve a style and effect that you want in your editing. So learn your histogram, understand it, understand how to manipulate it. Now let's move on to gear. So when it comes to gear, this is going to be a fun one. I wish I would have known all of these 3 things. Full frame, APS-C, MFT, or I guess not 3 things, but those 3 different formats are all different tools for different scenarios. So full frame, this is going to be really controversial and a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this. But full frame, if you have the money and you have unlimited budget, full frame will always be better than the 2 below it. But if you are on a limited budget, sometimes MFT will be the better tool for a certain scenario than full frame or APS-C. Sometimes APS-C will be the right tool for the scenario, and so on and so forth. So it's important to know kind of the differences between them, how to use them, and according to your style and your budget, what's most effective for you. So, for example, the OM1 and 300 millimeter f4 Pro that I just tested in tandem, that is a great MFT combo. And if I had a $5,500 budget and I knew that I wanted to get lots of relatively tight 600 millimeter roughly, right? Full frame equivalent, 600 millimeter shots. And that was the style that I like, is I like bird portraiture, for example. Then that's actually a really good buy for $5,500. And if I know especially that I'm not going to be shooting in very low light scenarios, that would be a fantastic buy for me. But let's say I like actually getting more scenic shots, wider shots, then that doesn't make a lot of sense for me to buy. In fact, if I like getting kind of wider, more bird scenery type shots, birdscapes as I call them, or wildlife photography, landscape-like images, then MFT doesn't really make sense for me as a whole genre in general. It probably makes a lot more sense for me to go something like full frame. Same thing, if I'm going into low light scenarios, full frame makes a lot of sense because you're getting a lot better noise control in your images because you have more physical space for the light to be captured, which leads to lower noise, graininess, and all of that good stuff. I'm wording it weird there. But all of that good stuff, right? And if you're finding yourself somewhere in the middle, APS-C may be the best solution, right? So they're all different tools for different scenarios. Now, I could talk about that all day long, but just know that all of them are different tools for different scenarios according to different budgets. Now, number 2 on gear, honesty. So this is kind of for me, but also for you to know. Talking about gear honestly will bring a lot of controversial things up and a lot of things that people do not like and will get very mad for. But it's important to remember that no gear is perfect. So when I do my gear reviews, for example, I've been getting a lot of flack lately, a lot of encouragement. So thank you guys for those of you who have encouraged me and appreciated that honest kind of nature of review that I like to go by, right? But with that honesty, there's a lot of people who think that maybe I'm just trying to throw hate at a system or I'm just, sold out or whatever it may be, right? And the funny thing is, I always get people that are like, oh, you were too harsh on this camera. And then I always get people that, oh, you were too easy on this camera, right? So you can never get it right, in other words, for what other people perceive. No gear is perfect. And my goal and my intention is to be aware of what my gear's strengths are and what its flaws are as kind of compared side by side to the other competitors in the industry. That way I can make effective purchasing decisions with my limited budget that I have. So all my gear reviews are meant in that type of a sense where I want you guys, because I know you guys work hard for your money, or at least most of you hopefully do, right? You're not doing too sketchy of stuff. I want you guys to be able to spend your hard-earned money wisely. And a lot of times I get frustrated when I purchase a piece of gear and I'm like, man, I wish I would have known this about my gear. But no one was honest enough to say it. Everyone was kind of sugarcoating things. Everyone was trying to be too nice. And so I'd rather you guys save your money if you guys, don't feel like it's the right fit for you. So I like to point out all of those things, pros and cons. That's for me to you guys. That way you guys kind of know as you're observing my gear reviews. But also, it's good to know in the sense that a lot of times I think a lot of people will, maybe if you shoot with other wildlife photographers, you might get kind of put down by other people. They might look at you a certain way for using certain types of gear. Kind of just look past that, look through the fog, be able to be confident in what your decisions are that you've made. Or if you have a budget, just be able to be like, you know what, this is what my budget could provide me. And this is the best that I could get in the moment. So I hope that's a word of encouragement to you as well. Which leads me to point number 3 in gear, right? I have 5 points for each section. Point number 3 in gear is be content with what you own. Use it to the fullest because you're never going to get the perfect set of gear. Even the perfect set of gear this year is not going to be the perfect set of gear next year. Technology changes quick, things evolve quickly. And like when the Sony A1 released, it was phenomenal, right? Untouched. There's nothing even close to it. But now there's a lot of things that compete very nice and closely with it and maybe even beat it out in a lot of scenarios. So when I did my Sony A1 review earlier this year, I think a lot of people got mad because they see it as the holy grail, right? When 2 years old now, it's actually started to fall a little bit behind in some ways. So be content with what you own, make the most of it, and remember that, in my opinion, this is kind of my own personal, layout of how I judge things, but I think that 75% of the quality of your shot comes down to your personal skill, your personal creativity, all of that good stuff. And maybe 25%, the icing on top, really comes down to gear. And when only 25% of the quality of your image comes down to gear, that means that it's much more reliant on you, your confidence, your creativity, your ability. So be content with what you own, make the most of it. And I promise you, you can do better things as a skilled photographer with bad gear than you can as a beginner or inexperienced person with amazing gear. Number 4, cameras change, lenses don't as much. Lenses do change over time, but lenses definitely don't change as much as cameras do. So cameras, man, they're evolving year by year. Cameras are just getting better and better and better. And this year's camera is 10 times better than 5 years ago's camera. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you guys get the point, right? Lenses are much more slow to change. So for example, the Sony 200-600, again, talking about Sony that I tested earlier this year, there were some things that were a little outdated about it, but it's still pretty stinking good for how old that camera lens is. And really what matters most is image quality in most scenarios, and also typically does it have a fast enough autofocus motor in the lens, right? For most people that matters a lot, which that lens meets both of those two things. It meets, right? So it's a great lens. Same thing with the Olympus 300mm that I just tested about a month ago, or less than a month ago by the time you guys saw it. That lens, it's 7 years old now, right? And phenomenal. I'd still recommend that lens. That is an amazing lens. So lenses, because of the nature of what they do, change much less quickly. And so therefore, investing into a really good camera lens, as long as you stay in that format, will last you a long time, as opposed to investing into a camera body may change very quickly. So this is getting long, guys. So thanks for sticking around. This is more of like a self podcast where I'm just kind of going off and just talking about it. We're about halfway through. Last thing on gear is that I wish I would have known spending $100 roughly, right? $100, $200 on editing software will save me thousands of dollars in gear cost. At the beginning, I was very hesitant to buy any sort of subscription-based editing service, right? Or buy any of the Topaz or DxO or any of those denoising products, stuff like that, right? But just spending simply a few $100s will save you thousands of dollars in future gear costs, like physical gear costs. And what I mean by that is always, if you can, gear will trump doing post-production work on it. So if you have the money, it will always help to get the good gear. But let's say, you want to buy a lens, right? Maybe the lowest that you can afford is a 6.3 f-stop lens at 600 millimeters, as opposed to you really wish you could have that one stop down, right? The 5.6 600 millimeters. But to get that, it's going to cost you an extra $4,000, which is in all reality true in a lot of these scenarios, right? So you need to spend an extra $4,000 to get one simple little camera setting adjustment down. Or you can get a little bit more blurry of a depth of field. And maybe it's not exactly perfect, but it's pretty dang close by in Lightroom subject selecting, taking the whole background and then blurring it out just a little bit more, right? Something like that costs you $10 a month, right? On Lightroom, or getting lower noise quality with denoising programs, stuff like that. So spend the money on the editing software and you'll save thousands in gear costs if you are budget concerned. All right, now let's hop into artistic. So we're on our third category here. We got 5 points for that as well. Number 1, always try something different. I wish, especially in my early days, but even today, I am constantly having to remind myself, always try something different. It's so easy to go out into the field, just look at what's, in front of you, and just try to shoot the same thing over and over, and just take the portrait shot, and get close as possible, right? But always try something different. Try to see if there's anything creatively you can add in here because of the exposure, the unique lighting maybe in the scenario. Or maybe there's a unique composition available if you back out a little bit, right? So my recommendation is always try something different, and don't be afraid to try something different. Now, number 2, artistically, knowing when to add and remove elements from the scene is an incredibly valuable skill as a wildlife photographer. Knowing when to leave a certain object in the scene can add a huge amount of dynamic and almost a story to the moment that you're looking at in front of you, right? But also knowing when to take it out because it's too distracting and taking away from the moment that you're wanting the viewer to look at through the photo is incredibly important. So, for example, I guess you can take maybe like some, I've had some shots before where I've put some really nice bokeh balls in the background. And sometimes those bokeh balls can be a huge compliment. Sometimes they can be a huge distraction. If it's placed a little bit wrong, it might become a huge distraction. And if it's placed just perfectly and balances out the frame, it can become a very big feature. Or maybe it accents the sun coming through the trees during sunrise, whatever it may be. Just knowing when to add and remove those elements from the scenery by adjusting your focal length, by adjusting your positioning, all of that good stuff is important. Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. That's kind of hard to visualize, I guess, as I'm speaking, trying to speak this out loud. But that concept is good to keep in mind. Now, number 3, foreground, foreground, foreground. So this is a little bit stylistic of me, I will admit. But man, I wish I would have known the power of foreground in my first 3 or 4 years of doing wildlife photography. I feel like I really discovered it around year 4 or 5. And using foreground in my images has absolutely changed how my images look for the better, in my opinion. And I think that it has given me a style and kind of a personality in my wildlife and bird photography myself. So I love foreground. I think that it can do wonders in an image. I think the reason why is, right, you always have a subject layer and you have a background in an image, but a lot of times people don't think about how do you get someone immersed into looking into that image. So you want them to be immersed into looking into the image that's in front of them. And a lot of times if you add a foreground layer, now it sets the bird not only against a background, but it sets it behind a foreground, a bird, wildlife, right? Whatever you're shooting, it sets it behind a foreground, which then makes the viewer kind of get immersed into a scene where they have to get into it. They're now looking through a bush at the subject with a background behind it, right? They're now looking through some leaves on a tree at the subject with a background behind it, and so on and so forth, looking over a rock, over some cliffs, so on and so forth. So foreground is an incredibly powerful tool for immersing a viewer in an image. Now, another thing artistically, this one's pretty simple. Get up an extra 15 minutes early. There's so many times where I try to cut sunrise, just like, I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna get there 10 minutes before sunrise, and I get there 10 minutes before sunrise, the light's starting to come up and like I'm getting set up and it's just not good, right? If I would have got up just an extra 15, 20 minutes early, I would have got there 30 minutes before sunrise and I would have been totally prepared by the time that the light really starts getting good. So get up an extra 15 minutes early. It'll do wonders, just that 15 minutes right there. Another one, number 5, last one of the artistic, is take your time with your composition. I wish that I would have, through most of my career, rather than just frantically taking photographs, I wish I would have walked up to a scene, observed the subject, thought about what elements are around it in the scene, and then try to figure out the best angle to capture it accordingly. Because a lot of times it's super tempting. You see the subject, you're afraid, you're frantic, it's gonna disappear. And so you just pull up your camera and boom, 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 shoot off as many shots as you can, right? But what really makes for those amazing shots, the shots that you're gonna remember that other people are gonna go like, ooh, that's a good shot, are the shots where you took your time and really found the right angle to represent it. So I have lots of examples of that. Yeah, really take your time with your composition and don't just shoot the first thing that comes to mind. That will do wonders in taking your photography from good to great. So that's all artistically. 25 minutes. Wow, this is taking a minute. All right, so before we get into the career, so we have this career section, community section that I wanted to talk about really quick, but I wanted to also plug really quick. So this is early. This is about a month early, maybe a month and a half early, but I wanted to let you guys know and remind you guys that Bird Burger photo competition. It's coming up again this year. So I wanted to just really quick say that, I hope you guys are able to join in again this year. I put a ton of work into it last year. Like, I've never put so much work into one individual thing in my whole life as I did to that competition last year, but it paid off. It turned out amazing. We had so much good reception to it. It was a great time with the community. Everyone was so encouraging, but it was also really fun and competitive. I love being able to be competitive under the spirit of good sportsmanship, right? And that is really our goal with the Bird Burger photo competition. This year, I've been starting to plan it out. I already have almost all the prizes lined up. I have some of the judges lined up, and it's going to be really good. So I'm really excited to have that again this year. I hope you guys choose to take part in that. And I think ultimately it's a really good way to kind of put yourself to the test, see how you measure up against other people, but also be encouraged in that, right? So the goal is to be encouraged and to kind of, have a really solid kind of friendly community of wildlife photography, while at the same exact time trying to see, where you measure up, where you compare, and what you can improve on, which is something I'll get into in this career and community kind of section in a second. So hope you guys join us for that. Stay tuned for that. Keep updated for that. Hit that notification bell. That way you make sure you're able to see that when it comes. I'll also, on a side note, I will also be giving some pretty sweet discounts to you guys, specifically my subscribers, with some stuff. In terms of your entries. So definitely be on the lookout, because those discounts will be available for a limited time, probably when it launches. Okay. So now, after the shameless plug, let's go into the career community. So in the career community grouping, I have found that wildlife photography is deeply personal. For some reason, the wildlife photography community, like for a hobby community, like people get intense about it. Like I've experienced some intense communities as well. This is definitely up there. I think one of the other ones would be like the b-boying community. I used to be a b-boy, a breakdancer, and that community is intense. There is a certain kind of culture and just respect that you do not break right in there, but wildlife photography as well. But unfortunately, I'll be honest, I have not experienced a lot of the upsides of the community of wildlife photography. I think as opposed to many other cultures and communities I've been a part of, the wildlife photography community is very quick to kind of judge and very quick to kind of attack and defend. And everything's about like my gear versus yours, or, you did this wrong, you shouldn't be doing that, and stuff like that. And those are all conversations that should be happening. But for whatever reason, I've experienced a lot that people get very upset and personal and very fired up about it very quickly. And so the wildlife photography community is very deeply personal. That's something important to know as you're heading into this, or kind of just talking about that and starting this conversation right now, right? And that means that we have to be careful with how we treat each other. We have to be kind in how we treat each other, but also be able to recognize that this is important stuff to a lot of people. For some people, this may be they're retired and this is their outlet of creativity, and this is their life's work now, right? For some people, they may be trying to do important ethical work with their wildlife photography or around wildlife photography, right? And those are important things, but we also need to remember to be kind, I think. So that's one note on the community. Number two, so getting more personal to a personal level, I would highly recommend find your own way of doing art. There's so many pieces of advice out there, right? Even from me, right? On this channel, on my main channel, you hear a lot of pieces of advice to you. You should do this. You should do that. And that's not going to stop me from trying to do that, because those are, hopefully, I believe those are helpful things, and other people are able to provide helpful pieces of advice as well. But at the end of the day, it's your art, and you need to be able to take that into your own hands and evaluate, is this really what I want? Is this the style that I want to go after? Is this person actually providing me good value here, or are they not? And so finding your own way and being comfortable with that, right? Like, so for so long in wildlife photography, really, I feel like that was ending as I kind of got into it about 8 years ago. But for a long time, it was all about just get as close as you can, get the portrait, right? And now that's starting to end. But for a long time, if you weren't doing that and you weren't investing into the 800 millimeter prime made by Canon, right, to be able to do that stuff, you were kind of shunned as a wildlife photographer. And I don't think that's the way of going about it. And I don't think you're going to find yourself content there. And also nothing new is going to come of this whole passion and hobby that we share. So it's important to find your own way to provide new value. That goes into number 3. What can you offer? So this is on a career note. So for those of you who are not trying to pursue this as a career, this does not pertain to you. But for me, who I have been trying to pursue this as a career for about 3-4 years now, roughly somewhere around there, right? Before that was a hobby, but then I decided about 3-4 years ago, I wanted to take it to the point of like, hey, I want to pursue this as a career. Find what you can offer, because you won't get paid for doing something that everyone else does. So find something new and unique that you are able to offer that other people are not. So for me, for example, I believe I provide a valuable community here on Bird Burger. And because of that, I've been able to make some decent money off of my wildlife photography general thing, right? With my main channel, I believe that I provide inspiration and stories that are told at a certain level of quality that are not achieved or not seen many other places, right? On a very personal level. So I'm able to provide and offer a certain level of quality there that brands can come in and partner with me to promote their products because it connects with people, it inspires people. So those things are different things that I can offer that I'm getting paid now because I offer something unique, right? At first, I tried doing prints, right? That's the thing. You do prints as a wildlife photographer. At least 7 years ago when I started, 8 years ago, that was the way that you did it, right? I made squat off that. Granted, I wasn't that good at the time, but even nowadays, I barely make any money off of prints, right? And so people are going to tell you like, do this. And it's something that's been tried and tested and true for so long. But a lot of times those things are already so used up that you have no room to offer something very new and you'll make very little money off it. So if you're wanting to pursue it as a career, find something new and unique you can offer that no one else has before. And that will lead you to much more income than you probably will by doing the same thing that everyone else has done. So that would be a piece of advice there. Now, number 4. Now we're getting into the end of it. Number 4, we got 2 more. Number 4 is take your own sustainable pace. For some people, wildlife photography is a daily thing. All they like to do is go out, shoot the photos, see the birds, and go home. They don't even edit their photos, and they go home, and that's it, right? That's what I like to call a bird photography documenter, or just simply a birder. Someone who's not really super interested in the art of bird photography. They just like to be out in nature, and they just like to experience nature and experience birds and capture them close up so they can see them better. That's one type of person, right? On the other end, you have the type of person who's maybe a content creator like myself. And for someone like me, I find myself getting out and doing wildlife photography much less than maybe a lot of other people. I find myself getting out about once a week on average, as opposed to the person who's going out every day. That's not a lot. But I'm really interested in telling my stories, sharing my moments. And I'm also interested in the business side of it. I thoroughly do enjoy being an entrepreneur and a creative on the business side of it. So find your own pace that you enjoy. At the beginning, I thought, man, I had to be out at least every day or every other day is what I thought. That was my requirement. So I would go out every other day and I was just like, dude, I don't even enjoy this. This is getting to the point where I don't feel like I'm taking quality photos. I feel like my creativity is being drained constantly. And I'm not producing the things that I like the most. And so I stopped doing that, started doing a once a week more basis. And I have found that that is really the spot for me. But for some people, that may not be the case. They may want to be out more, right? So find your own sustainable pace that you enjoy and you like. All right. So lastly, let's get into the very last point, which this is what I would say is the most important thing of all. Desire to learn from others. If you forget everything else that I said, take this away with you. Desire to learn from others. And I mean desire, because as a wildlife photographer, the number one thing that will keep you from growing, keep you from enjoying, in my experience, is lacking a desire to learn from others. When you desire to learn from others, you get better, because you humble yourself into a position of where now you can see things you haven't seen before. You have new perspectives, new styles that can be implemented that you've never tried before. So it grows you as a wildlife photographer. Also being open to feedback. Like if you ask people, hey, what can I improve here about this? And you listen to that, that can vastly improve things that you never thought were important before, or just help you up your game to the next level, right? So all of that, but also desiring to learn from others helps you enjoy your craft more, because suddenly you are not in competition with them, but rather you are in a learning state from them, which naturally is a state of excitement. It's a state of newness. It's a state of growing, right? All those things are a lot of things that provide a lot of enjoyment for the craft. So I would argue that when you desire to learn from others, this passion, this hobby, or this career, whatever it may be for you, can be something that is much more lifelong as opposed to momentary and short. And because you'll enjoy it more, and it's something that will grow you incrementally so much quicker than before. So if nothing else, that's what I'd recommend the most. So thanks for sticking along with me on this. I hope you enjoyed. Hope it was valuable. It's very different from what I normally do. Like I said, I've never done I haven't in over probably a year and a half done an unscripted, no teleprompter type script like this where I'm just talking to the camera, but I really enjoyed it. And there was just a lot of thoughts I wanted to get out in a very raw and authentic way. And a lot of valuable things I've been thinking about, hopefully, that I wanted to share with you guys. So if you liked it, please like it below. Please like the video below. That helps promote it in the algorithm. If you aren't subscribed to the channel, I'd be honored if you subscribe to the channel as well. And stay on the lookout for the Bird Burger photo competition. You might be the one to win $1,000 this year. We'll see. All right. I'll see you guys next time.